What if I told you that a single piece of parchment could change the course of human history, not through war or politics, but by simply revealing the world as no one had seen it before? Maps are far more than lines on paper. They're snapshots of our collective imagination, capturing the hopes, fears, and dreams of entire civilizations. Think about the last time you glanced at a map on your phone. It's a miracle of precision, showing every street, every landmark with pinpoint accuracy. But rewind just a few centuries, and maps were filled with blank spaces, mythical creatures, and entire continents that didn't exist. These weren't mistakes. They were reflections of how people saw their world, shaped by the limits of knowledge and the boundless reach of curiosity. Take a moment to picture the first map you ever held. Maybe it was in a classroom or folded awkwardly in the backseat of a car during a family road trip. Now imagine that same sense of wonder, but magnified 1,000 times, because the maps we're about to explore didn't just guide travelers. They sparked revolutions in thought. They challenged kings, inspired explorers, and even settled debates about the very nature of reality. Some were so controversial they were hidden away for generations, while others became symbols of national pride. Each one carries the fingerprints of the people who made them, cartographers who often risked everything to push the boundaries of what was known. This is the story of 30 maps that didn't just record geography, they reshaped it. From ancient Babylonian clay tablets etched with star charts to medieval masterpieces that mixed science with legend, these maps are time machines. They transport us to moments when humanity took a collective leap forward, whether by proving the Earth was round or revealing the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. And here's the thing, every one of these maps has a secret. Some were drawn in secrecy, others were tools of propaganda, and a few were outright forgeries. But their legacy is undeniable. They didn't just change how we navigate, they changed how we think. So let's unfold these extraordinary documents together, layer by layer, and discover how the world we know today was literally drawn into existence. Buried beneath the sands of time for over 2,500 years, the Babylonian World Map is a fragile clay tablet that whispers secrets from the dawn of civilization. Discovered in the ruins of a library in modern-day Iraq, this ancient artifact, no larger than your hand, shows a world unrecognizable to us today. At its heart lies Babylon, drawn as a rectangle straddling the Euphrates River, the bustling center of a universe that extended only as far as the edges of Mesopotamia. Beyond it, the mapmakers carved a great circular ocean they called the Bitter River, a boundary beyond which only legend and speculation could wander. What makes this map extraordinary isn't just its age, it's the way it captures a moment when myth and geography were inseparable. Scattered across its surface are cryptic labels like Land of the Sun, a place where no human could survive the scorching heat, and distant mountains where the gods were said to dwell. These weren't decorative flourishes, they were vital parts of the Babylonian understanding of reality. Imagine living in a world where every unexplored region held the potential for divine intervention or cosmic terror. Unlike modern maps which strive for objectivity, this tablet was as much a spiritual guide as a geographical one. Yet for all its mythical elements, the map reveals something profoundly human, an irresistible urge to make sense of the unknown. The Babylonians weren't just drawing land, they were defining their place in creation. The circular shape wasn't a mistake. It mirrored their belief in a flat earth encased by the heavens, a concept that would endure for centuries. Even the choice to center Babylon wasn't arbitrary. It declared their city the axis of civilization, a bold statement of cultural pride etched in clay. Today, we might smile at the inaccuracies, but this humble tablet was revolutionary. It marked one of the first times a society tried to compress the vastness of their world into a tangible object. The fact that it survived wars, empires, and the slow erosion of time is nothing short of miraculous. Every crack in its surface tells a story, not just of Babylon, but of our eternal desire to chart the uncharted, to leave a mark saying, "We were here, and this is how we saw the world." Claudius Ptolemy never set foot on most of the lands he mapped, yet his vision of the world would outlast empires. In the 2nd century, while Rome ruled the Mediterranean, this Greek-Egyptian scholar sat in the library of Alexandria, surrounded by scrolls and star charts, and did something unprecedented. He turned geography into a science. His masterpiece, the Geographia, wasn't just a collection of maps, it was a manual for understanding the Earth itself. For the first time, someone proposed a grid system of latitude and longitude, slicing the world into measurable coordinates like a cosmic chessboard. Imagine the audacity of this idea in an era when many still believed the Earth was flat or that dragons lurked beyond the horizon. Ptolemy's original map vanished centuries ago, likely crumbling to dust or lost in the fires that consumed ancient libraries. But his ideas refused to die. When Renaissance scholars rediscovered his work in the 14th century, it was like finding a technical blueprint from the past. They painstakingly reconstructed his vision, and what emerged was astonishing: a world that stretched from the Canary Islands in the west to China in the east, with Africa curling mysteriously southward. It wasn't perfect. Ptolemy underestimated Earth's circumference by thousands of miles, a mistake that would later tempt Columbus into believing he could reach Asia by sailing west. But the real revolution was in the method. Earlier maps had been artistic interpretations filled with guesswork and mythology. Ptolemy demanded evidence. He gathered sailors' logs, merchants' accounts, and astronomical data, then distilled them into mathematical certainty. The ripple effects of his work are almost impossible to overstate. For over a millennium, his map was the gold standard, copied and studied from Baghdad to Byzantium. Explorers carried versions of it on their voyages, kings used it to plan conquests, and scholars debated its finer points in candlelit universities. Even its errors became catalysts for discovery. When European sailors finally ventured beyond Ptolemy's known world, they weren't just exploring new lands, they were testing the limits of an ancient Greek's imagination. What makes Ptolemy's legacy so enduring isn't just the accuracy he achieved with limited tools, it's the radical idea that the world could and should be measured. He handed humanity a new language for describing space, one that still underpins everything from GPS satellites to the maps on our phones. In a way, every time we tap a screen to find our location, we're whispering thanks to a scholar who, 2,000 years ago, dared to put the whole world on a grid. While Europe's medieval maps often showed fantastical creatures at the edges of a flat Earth, a brilliant scholar in Sicily was quietly rewriting the rules of geography. Muhammad al-Idrisi, an Arab cartographer working at the cosmopolitan court of King Roger II, spent 15 years piecing together something extraordinary, a map so precise it would remain unmatched for centuries. Known as the Tabula Rogeriana, this masterpiece wasn't just a leap forward in accuracy, it was a testament to the power of collaboration across cultures. What made al-Idrisi's work revolutionary wasn't just its staggering detail, it was how he gathered his knowledge. Arab merchants brought tales of monsoons guiding ships across the Indian Ocean. Jewish travelers shared accounts of trade routes snaking through Central Asia. Greek texts, preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars, offered mathematical frameworks. Even King Roger himself sent envoys to verify distant landmarks. The result, a map that shattered myths, showing Africa as a continent that could theoretically be circumnavigated and correctly depicting the Indian Ocean as open water, not a locked sea as many Europeans then believed. But perhaps the most striking choice was its orientation, with south at the top. To modern eyes, this seems disorienting, but it was a deliberate challenge to convention. In Arab cartography, placing Mecca at the top was a symbolic nod to spiritual significance over arbitrary tradition. This wasn't a mistake, it was a reminder that every map is a cultural artifact, reflecting the priorities of its creators. The Tabula Rogeriana's legacy lies in its humility. Unlike maps that filled blanks with dragons or biblical legends, Al-Idrisi left unknown regions empty, a silent admission of the limits of human knowledge. When King Roger died, the original silver disc was lost, likely melted down in one of Sicily's many upheavals, but copies survived in books, quietly influencing explorers for generations. Centuries later, Vasco da Gama would sail around Africa's southern tip, proving Al-Idrisi right about the Indian Ocean. One wonders, had more European scholars studied this map instead of dismissing it as foreign, how much sooner might the age of exploration have dawned? The Tabula Rogeriana stands as a monument to an alternate path, one where curiosity, not dogma, guided humanity's hand. Hanging in Hereford Cathedral, a 6-foot-wide sheet of vellum tells a story far stranger than any fantasy novel. The Hereford Mappa Mundi isn't just a map, it's a medieval mindscape where rivers flow with biblical allegory and the edges of the earth bristle with monsters. Created around the year 1300 by monks whose world was equal parts scripture and superstition, this sprawling masterpiece places Jerusalem at its literal center, radiating spiritual significance like the sun. To modern eyes, it might look like a chaotic collage, but every bizarre detail from the Minotaur lurking near Crete to Adam and Eve standing naked in Eden was meticulously placed to teach moral lessons, not geographical ones. What's most striking isn't the map's inaccuracies, but its purpose. Unlike Al-Idrisi's scientific precision or Ptolemy's mathematical grids, the Mappa Mundi was designed to guide souls, not ships. Pilgrims would gather around it, tracing routes to holy sites while absorbing warnings about the dangers of sin, symbolized by grotesque creatures in the margins. The map's circular shape wasn't a mistake. It mirrored the medieval belief in God's perfect creation, with time and space orbiting around divine will. Even the ink held meaning, red for Christ's blood, gold for heavenly light. Yet hidden beneath the theology are glimpses of real exploration. Strange beasts labeled, "Here be dragons," often marked places beyond Christian reach, like the Himalayas or the Sahara, where travelers' tall tales blended with genuine curiosity. The map's southern edge shows a lone figure stepping through a ring of fire, a possible nod to early rumors of Antarctica, or perhaps a metaphor for the limits of human understanding. The miracle is that it survived at all. During the English Civil War, Puritan soldiers nearly destroyed it as idolatrous nonsense. For centuries, it gathered dust in a cathedral cupboard, dismissed as a relic of backward thinking. Only in the 1800s did scholars realize its true value, not as a guide to Earth's surface, but as a window into how an entire civilization made sense of existence. Today, it whispers a profound truth. Every map, no matter how accurate, is shaped by the fears and dreams of those who drew it. While Europe was still emerging from the Middle Ages, a masterpiece of cartography was taking shape in a Royal Korean workshop, one that would reveal the astonishing reach of Asian knowledge centuries before Western explorers set sail. The Kangnido Map, painted on silk in 1402, doesn't just depict Korea or China, it stretches from the Mediterranean to Japan, with Africa's Horn curving southward in a shape that wouldn't appear on European maps for another 100 years. What makes this so remarkable isn't just its accuracy, but its very existence. Here was a map proving that the Silk Road wasn't just a path for spices and silk. It was a highway for ideas, where Arab astronomers' calculations met Chinese surveyors' precision and Korean scholars' synthesis. Look closely at the details, and the Kangnido reveals its secrets. The Nile River fans out like a tree, mirroring accounts from Arab traders who'd navigated its delta. The Arabian Peninsula juts into the Persian Gulf with startling fidelity, likely drawn from Persian navigational charts. Even more impressive, the map's creators knew about the Great Wall of China's winding path and the sprawling cities of Central Asian knowledge that would have taken decades to compile through first-hand travel or meticulous transcription of travelers' tales. But the real genius lies in what the Kangnido doesn't show. Unlike European maps of the era, there are no sea monsters or "here be dragons" labels, just empty ocean space, a quiet admission that some things remained unknown. This humility speaks volumes about the mapmakers' philosophy. They valued evidence over embellishment. Perhaps most poignant is the map's timing. Created just before Admiral Zheng He's legendary voyages, it hints at a world where Asia could have dominated global exploration. Had political winds blown differently, might the Kangnido have inspired even bolder journeys? Instead, it was nearly forgotten outside Korea, surviving as a single fragile copy. Today, it stands as a silent rebuke to the myth of European exceptionalism, proof that the medieval world was far more connected and far more curious than we often assume. In a small German workshop in 1507, a cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller made a decision that would echo through history. He labeled a vast, uncharted landmass America. This single act, immortalized in his 12-panel masterpiece, didn't just honor explorer Amerigo Vespucci, it shattered Europe's understanding of the world. The Waldseemuller map wasn't merely revolutionary for its naming. Hidden in its intricate details lay an even more startling revelation: the Pacific Ocean, drawn with eerie precision a full decade before Balboa's famous sighting and Magellan's treacherous crossing. How did Waldseemuller know? The answer lies in whispers of secret Portuguese voyages and Vespucci's own letters, which hinted at a new world far larger than anyone had dared to imagine. What sets this map apart isn't just its accuracy, it's the audacity of its vision. For the first time, a cartographer dared to depict the Americas as continents separate from Asia, floating in an ocean that few Europeans knew existed. The effect was like removing a blindfold. Suddenly, the world wasn't just Europe, Africa, and Asia with a few islands on the fringe. It was a globe teeming with undiscovered possibilities. The map's creators even included an inset portrait of Ptolemy, the ancient geographer whose ideas had dominated for centuries, as if to say, "We respect you, but your time is over." Yet the most fascinating twist came later. Waldseemuller himself seemed to doubt his bold choices. In later editions, he removed the name America, perhaps bowing to political pressure or second-guessing his sources. But the genie was out of the bottle. Printers across Europe had already copied the map, spreading the name like wildfire. By the time authorities realized what had happened, America was on every merchant's lips and every king's agenda. The map's legacy is a paradox, a blend of brilliance and mystery. Its depiction of South America's coastline is unnervingly accurate, suggesting access to classified nautical charts. Yet it still includes phantom islands and exaggerations, reminders that even the most enlightened minds of the age couldn't escape entirely from myth. Today, only one original copy survives, purchased by the Library of Congress for $10 million. a fitting tribute to the document that literally put a name to the New World. In the end, Waldseemüller's greatest contribution wasn't just geography, it was imagination. He gave Europe a new mental framework, one where unknown lands weren't threats to fear, but opportunities to seize. Imagine a map so valuable it had to be smuggled out of a country under cover of darkness. The Cantino Planisphere wasn't just a navigational tool, it was a stolen treasure, a cartographic heist that changed the course of history. Created in 1502 by an anonymous Portuguese cartographer, this stunning work of art was secretly commissioned by Alberto Cantino, an Italian spy working for the Duke of Ferrara. His mission, to steal Portugal's most closely guarded secret, the exact routes their explorers had taken to reach Africa's gold-rich coasts and the mysterious lands beyond. What he delivered was more than just ink on parchment, it was a smoking gun, proof that the world was far larger and far richer than anyone had dreamed. What makes this map pulse with intrigue are the invisible lines of power running through it. Look closely, and you'll spot the thin, ominous stroke marking the Treaty of Tordesillas line of demarcation, an imaginary boundary drawn by the Pope himself, splitting the globe between Spain and Portugal like a celestial knife. To the east, Portugal claimed Africa and the sea route to India. To the west, Spain got the still murky Americas. But here's the twist. The Cantino Planisphere shows Brazil bulging across that line, suggesting Portuguese explorers had already quietly claimed territory meant for Spain. This wasn't just geography, it was geopolitical sabotage, a quiet land grab hidden in plain sight. The map's true brilliance lies in its details, each one a revelation. For the first time, Africa's coastline is rendered with startling accuracy, from the jagged teeth of the Cape of Good Hope to the gentle curve of the Gulf of Guinea. These weren't guesses, they were direct transcriptions of Portuguese navigators' painstaking charts, the product of decades spent battling storms and scurvy to unlock the Indian Ocean trade. Even more astonishing, the map hints at Brazil's existence a full year before Cabral's official discovery, fueling theories that Portuguese ships had been secretly exploring South America long before they admitted it. Yet for all its precision, the Cantino Planisphere has ghostly gaps. The Caribbean is a haze of speculation, and North America is conspicuously absent, not because it didn't exist, but because Portugal hadn't bothered to explore there yet. This selectivity reveals the map's true purpose. It wasn't meant to educate, but to exploit. Every coastline, every bay was a potential warehouse for spices, gold, or enslaved people. The map's survival is as miraculous as its creation. After Cantino spirited it to Italy, it vanished for centuries, rediscovered in a dusty Italian library in 1859. Today, it's a silent witness to the birth of globalization, not through cooperation, but through theft, greed, and the relentless hunger to own the unknown. Gerardus Mercator never set sail around the world, yet his name became synonymous with how we see it. In 1569, the Flemish cartographer unveiled a map that didn't just guide ships, it warped reality itself. The Mercator projection was a stroke of genius for navigators. By stretching the globe into a rectangle with parallel lines of latitude and longitude, sailors could plot straight-line courses across oceans without constantly adjusting their compasses. For the first time, captains could trust their charts to lead them true north, literally. But this mathematical convenience came at a strange cost. The farther landmasses were from the equator, the more they ballooned in size. Greenland, for instance, stretched to appear as vast as Africa, even though it's barely 1/14 as large. Russia sprawled like a sleeping giant, while entire equatorial nations shrank into near invisibility. What makes the Mercator map so fascinating isn't just its distortions, but how they've shaped centuries of geopolitical thinking. When European empires divided the world among themselves, they did so using maps that made their northern homelands appear dominant. Colonial powers could point to these exaggerated territories as proof of their natural supremacy, while Africa and South America seemed smaller, less significant. The psychological impact was profound. Generations grew up believing that the global north simply was larger, more consequential. Even today, most classroom maps and digital platforms default to Mercator's vision, reinforcing subconscious biases about which parts of the world matter most. Yet the projection's staying power isn't just about politics, it's about practicality. Mercator's grid system became the backbone of modern navigation, from 19th century naval charts to the GPS algorithms guiding today's cargo ships. Pilots still rely on Mercator-inspired maps for flight planning, where angular consistency matters more than area. The map's true legacy lies in this duality, a tool so precise for movement, yet so misleading for perspective. Critics have proposed alternatives like the Peters projection, which sacrifices shape for accurate landmass proportions, but none have fully dethroned Mercator. Perhaps because his map reflects an uncomfortable truth, every cartographic choice is a compromise. Do we prioritize navigation or equity, familiarity or accuracy? The Mercator projection forces us to confront how deeply maps influence not just how we travel, but how we think. It's a reminder that even the most scientific tools are never truly neutral. They carry the fingerprints of the eras that created them and the power structures they inadvertently upheld. Tucked away in Oxford's Bodleian Library for centuries, the Selden Map lay forgotten until a historian's sharp eye noticed something extraordinary. Painted on delicate paper around 1600, this Ming Dynasty treasure doesn't just show China. It unveils an entire maritime world, from the bustling ports of Java to the twisting coastlines of Vietnam. What makes it revolutionary isn't just its accuracy, but its perspective. While European maps of the era glorified conquest or religious dogma, this was a practical guide to profit and connection, its spiderweb of trade routes revealing a thriving Asian network that predated European dominance by decades. Look closely, and the map tells a silent rebellion. Traditional Chinese cartography had always centered on the emperor's realm, with barbarian lands fading into the margins. But here, the South China Sea dominates, crisscrossed by precise compass bearings and dotted with ports where spices, silks, and silver changed hands. The message was clear: commerce, not conquest, drove this world. Even more astonishing are the subtle details: monsoon wind patterns marked with delicate brushstrokes, shoals and reefs noted for safe passage, even annotations in multiple languages. This wasn't just a map, it was a multilingual user manual for globalization, created when Shakespeare was still writing plays. The Selden Map's origins are as mysterious as its survival. Some scholars believe it was crafted by a Fujianese merchant, their knowledge honed by decades at sea. Others suggest it was a collaborative effort, pooling intelligence from Arab sailors, Malay fishermen, and Chinese junk captains. What's certain is that it reflects a reality European explorers were only beginning to grasp. Southeast Asia wasn't a blank space waiting to be discovered, but a complex hub of exchange where Chinese merchants had traded for generations. Perhaps the most poignant twist is how the map reached Oxford. Likely seized by English privateers from a captured Spanish galleon, which had itself taken it from a Chinese ship, it became a curiosity, then a relic. For 300 years, no one realized its significance. Today, it stands as a corrective to history, proving that the age of exploration wasn't a European monologue, but a messy, multicultural conversation. The Selden Map doesn't just chart waters, It rewrites the story of who mapped the world and why. In an Amsterdam workshop where the scent of ink and vellum hung thick in the air, Willem Blyu and his son Joan crafted something beyond mere maps. They built a visual empire. The Blyu Atlas, first published in 1635, wasn't just a navigational tool. It was a flex of Dutch ingenuity, a declaration that the tiny republic punching above its weight in global trade could also dominate the art of cartography. Each page was a masterpiece, etched with such precision that you could almost hear the creak of ships rigging in bustling Batavia or feel the damp mist rolling off the canals of Venice. What set these maps apart wasn't just their beauty, though the hand-painted gold leaf and swirling cartouches framing sea monsters surely dazzled. It was their dual purpose. For merchants, they offered razor-sharp accuracy. The latest updates from Dutch East India Company captains ensured every spice port in Indonesia and every silver route to the Americas was meticulously recorded. Yet for wealthy patrons, they served as luxury objects, bound in gilt leather and displayed like jewels. A single volume could cost as much as a middle-class home, making ownership a potent status symbol. Look closer and the atlas reveals quiet revolutions. Unlike earlier maps that squeezed the world into rigid frameworks, Blyu's work embraced fluidity. Some sheets used Mercator's projection for navigation. Others adopted polar views to showcase Arctic whaling grounds. Even the decorative elements whispered secrets. Cherubs blowing wind across the oceans hinted at the seasonal monsoons that powered Dutch trade, while elaborate battle scenes in the margins subtly celebrated naval victories over rival Spain. But perhaps the most telling detail lies in what the atlas omitted. While other nations filled unexplored territories with mythical kingdoms, the Blyus often left them blank, not out of ignorance but honesty. These empty spaces were invitations, tacitly acknowledging that even the mighty Dutch hadn't yet unlocked all the world's doors. The Atlas's legacy is bittersweet. In 1672, a fire ravaged the Blyu workshop, destroying most of the original copper plates. The few surviving copies became relics of a fleeting golden age, when maps could be both ruthlessly practical and breathtakingly poetic. Today, they remind us that cartography's greatest works aren't just about accuracy. They're about ambition, artistry, and the audacity to try and capture the whole world between two covers. In the twilight of France's monarchy, a father-son duo embarked on a mission that would redefine the very shape of their nation. The Cassini family didn't just map France, they measured its soul, using the cold precision of mathematics to strip away centuries of royal exaggeration. Armed with telescopes, quadrants, and an obsessive dedication to triangles, Giovanni Domenico Cassini and his son Jacques spent decades crisscrossing the countryside, climbing church steeples and hilltops to take thousands of angular measurements. Their method triangulation was simple in theory but revolutionary in execution. By treating France as a giant geometric puzzle, they could calculate distances with unprecedented accuracy, turning guesswork into grid coordinates. The result, unveiled in 1744, was a shock to the crown. France's coastline, once bloated by patriotic cartographers to appear more imposing, had shrunk. The kingdom was nearly 20% smaller than previously claimed, a revelation so jarring that King Louis Roman XV supposedly quipped, "My cartographers have cost me more territory than my enemies." But the Cassini map's true impact wasn't just bruised royal pride, it proved that science could trump tradition. For the first time, a nation's borders weren't drawn by ego or estimation, but by the unflinching laws of trigonometry. What made this project extraordinary wasn't just its scale, over 180 sheets painstakingly hand-engraved, but its legacy. the Cassini's techniques became the blueprint for modern topographic surveys, inspiring everything from Napoleon's military maps to today's satellite imaging. Their work revealed something profound, that even the most familiar landscapes hold secrets, waiting for someone willing to measure rather than assume. Yet the map's creation was as human as it was scientific. Jacques Cassini nearly died when a church spire collapsed under him during measurements. Teams of surveyors faced bandits, blizzards, and suspicious villagers convinced they were tax collectors in disguise. The final product, finished by later generations, bore the scars of this struggle: ink smudged from candlelit drafting sessions, annotations correcting earlier errors. In the end, the Cassini map did more than shrink France. It expanded humanity's capacity to see itself clearly. No longer could rulers inflate their domains with cartographic flattery. The age of measurable truth had dawned, one triangle at a time. When Thomas Jefferson handed Meriwether Lewis a pile of blank notebooks in 1803, he wasn't just equipping an expedition, he was arming a mission of imperial ambition. The map that Lewis and Clark would create over the next 3 years wasn't merely a record of rivers and mountain passes. It was a blueprint for conquest, drawn in real time as they walked, paddled, and sometimes crawled across 1,800 miles of uncharted territory. Armed with sextants, compasses, and ink that froze in winter, they didn't just document the American West, they claimed it, one precise measurement at a time. What makes their map extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, but its audacious gaps. Vast stretches labeled unknown or supposed Rocky Mountains reveal how much even educated Americans didn't know about the land they just purchased from France in the Louisiana Territory. Yet every blank space was an invitation. When Clark sketched the Continental Divide, proving no mythical northwest water route connected the Atlantic and Pacific, he didn't just fill in a geographical mystery, he shattered a national fantasy. The map's true power lay in its details: notations of fertile soil perfect for future farms, strategic river junctions ideal for forts, and the locations of indigenous nations whose knowledge made the journey possible. The expedition's reliance on native guides is the map's silent paradox. Sacagawea's presence as interpreter and diplomat appears as a footnote, yet without her, the core of discovery might have starved or been turned back. Indigenous trails became their routes, indigenous place names peppered their journals, and indigenous generosity saved them repeatedly. Yet this same map would later justify the displacement of those very communities, its lines and symbols wielded like weapons in the hands of settlers. Lewis and Clark's legacy is etched in contradictions. Their meticulous records of grizzly bears and prairie dogs read like a naturalist's dream, yet their descriptions of ideal settlement sites foreshadowed ecological destruction. They portrayed themselves as peaceful explorers, but the muskets and cannons they carried sent a clear message. Today, their map hangs in the Library of Congress, a masterpiece of perseverance that also marks the beginning of a painful chapter, proof that maps don't just reveal landscapes, they alter them forever. In the cluttered desk of an unemployed electrical draftsman named Harry Beck, one of the most radical ideas in cartography was about to take shape. The year was 1931, and London's underground system had become a tangled beast, a growing web of lines that twisted and turned beneath the city like roots of an ancient tree. Traditional maps tried to mirror these convoluted routes with geographical precision, but the result was a mess of overlapping spaghetti that left commuters more confused than enlightened. Beck saw the problem differently. What if a subway map didn't need to reflect the chaos above ground? What if, like an electrical circuit diagram, his area of expertise, it could strip away the noise and reveal the elegant logic beneath? His breakthrough was deceptively simple: abandon reality. Beck straightened curves into clean 45 and 90-degree angles, spaced stations evenly regardless of actual distance, and expanded the crowded city center while shrinking the suburbs. The Thames, that winding liquid heart of London, became a stark horizontal slash. At first, transport officials rejected his design as too radical, too abstract. But when they reluctantly tested it in 1933, something magical happened. For the first time, ordinary people could glance at the map and instantly understand how to get from Piccadilly to Paddington without deciphering a topographic puzzle. The city's complexity had been tamed by a few bold lines and circles. Beck's genius wasn't just in simplification, it was in psychology. He realized that underground travelers didn't care which way the train physically turned between stops. They needed to know where to change lines and in what order. By sacrificing literal truth, he created a higher kind of truth, clarity. His color-coded lines became visual metaphors, turning the underground into a sort of mechanical bloodstream pumping commuters through the city's veins. The map's influence rippled far beyond London. From New York to Tokyo, transit systems copied Beck's approach, proving that sometimes distortion is the path to understanding. Even the digital age owes him a debt. His DNA is visible in everything from smartphone app interfaces to neural network diagrams. Yet the real lesson of Beck's map isn't about design, it's about how we navigate complexity. Whether mapping a subway or a life, the most useful guides aren't always the ones that mirror reality, but the ones that help us move through it with confidence. The Peters projection burst onto the scene in 1974 like a cartographic grenade, shattering the conventions that had shaped world maps for centuries. While most mapmakers tweaked coastlines or updated borders, German historian Arno Peters went after something far more radical, the very power structure embedded in how we see the planet. His creation wasn't just a new way to draw the world, it was a moral indictment of every map that came before it. At first glance, the Peters projection looks strangely stretched. Africa looms large, South America stands tall, and Europe shrinks to its actual proportions rather than its traditionally inflated size. This wasn't an artistic choice, but a mathematical necessity. Peters used an equal area projection, ensuring each square inch of the map represented the same amount of land area on Earth. The effect was revelatory. Suddenly, Africa, which appears smaller than Greenland on a Mercator map despite being 14 times larger, reclaimed its rightful dominance. South America stretched nearly twice as long as Europe, matching reality rather than colonial bias. What made this map explosive wasn't just its accuracy, but its timing. Released during the Cold War and the rise of global decolonization movements, the Peters projection became a visual manifesto for developing nations. Churches and NGOs adopted it as an educational tool, using its stark honesty to highlight global inequality. A poster version circulated with the slogan, "Equal area, equal rights," turning geography into activism. Critics, many from traditional cartographic circles, dismissed it as propaganda, arguing its extreme distortions of shape made it impractical for navigation. But that missed the point entirely. Peters wasn't trying to guide ships. He wanted to jolt viewers into realizing how deeply maps shape our perception of power. The genius of the Peters projection lies in its uncomfortable questions. Why had generations accepted a map that made Europe appear 3 times larger than India? How had cartographic tradition quietly reinforced the idea that northern nations were inherently more significant? Even the map's color scheme broke convention's landmasses rendered in bold. Unshaded hues refused to let the eye glide over so-called peripheral regions. Yet the map's legacy is as contested as its reception. Some scholars note that Peters, for all his idealism, wasn't the first to champion equal area maps. Medieval Islamic cartographers and 19th century French scientists had explored similar concepts. Others argue that all world projections involve compromise, and Peter's version sacrifices too much shape for the sake of area, but perhaps that's precisely why it endures. Hanging in classrooms from Nairobi to Oslo, the Peter's projection remains a stubborn reminder that every map is an argument, a silent, persuasive force that whispers, "This is how the world is." Or more importantly, this is how it could be seen. On June 28, 2005, geography underwent a quiet revolution, not in a university or government lab, but on millions of ordinary computer screens. Google Earth didn't just update cartography, it erased the final barriers between people and the planet. Suddenly, a child in Tokyo could zoom down to inspect the pyramids of Giza in photorealistic detail. A farmer in Brazil could trace deforestation patterns across the Amazon with a few clicks. For the first time in history, the world's maps weren't locked in leather-bound atlases or guarded by militaries. They were free, fluid, and at everyone's fingertips. What made this breakthrough so transformative wasn't just the satellite imagery, though the ability to see your own rooftop from space was mind-bending enough, but the layers of data woven beneath the surface. Ancient Roman roads materialized over modern suburbs with a toggle switch. Real-time weather systems pulsed across oceans. Climate scientists could overlay decades of glacial retreat like flipping pages in a time-lapse storybook. The map became alive, responsive, a living document rather than a static snapshot. Yet the most profound change was psychological. Earlier maps had always demanded interpretation, symbols, scales, the cartographer's selective vision. Google Earth offered the illusion of pure objectivity, as if you were floating above the planet with godlike clarity. This created a peculiar paradox. The more we could see, the more we believed we understood. Archaeologists discovered forgotten Mayan ruins by spotting geometric patterns in the Guatemalan jungle. Ordinary citizens debunked government claims by comparing official statements with time-stamped satellite views. The map wasn't just a tool, it was a truth-teller, but for all its power, Google Earth also revealed how much remains hidden. The ocean floors covering 70% of the planet are still less mapped than the surface of Mars. Cloud cover and government restrictions leave eerie blank patches where pixels blur into abstraction. Even in populated areas, shadows persist. The same tool that helped track wildfires in California can't penetrate the secrecy of North Korea's labor camps or the shifting sands of contested borders. Perhaps the greatest mystery Google Earth uncovered is this: total knowledge is an illusion. Every zoom in exposes new questions. Why does this patch of desert in Namibia look like a perfect fairy circle? Who built these strange structures in China's Gobi Desert? The more we map, the more we realize how much we've missed. In a way, the digital age didn't end exploration. It reignited it, turning every curious mind into a potential Magellan with a mouse instead of a ship. The legacy of this era isn't just in the terabytes of data, but in the shift it sparked. Maps are no longer just for navigation or ownership, they're conversations. A hiker adds a trail review, a historian tags a forgotten battlefield, a climate activist marks receding shorelines. For centuries, cartography was about claiming space. Now it's about sharing it and realizing that no matter how high the resolution, the world will always hold secrets waiting for someone to look closer. Tucked away in the Topkapi Palace archives for centuries, a tattered fragment of sheepskin parchment holds one of cartography's most tantalizing mysteries. The Pirry Rise Map, drawn in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral and polymath Pirry Rise, shouldn't exist, at least not with the details it contains. Roughly 1/3 of the original survives, showing the Atlantic from Europe to Brazil with uncanny precision. But it's the southern edge that sends shivers down historians' spines. A landmass bearing an eerie resemblance to Antarctica's ice-free coastline 280 years before the continent was officially discovered. How could a 16th century Ottoman cartographer depict a land buried under miles of ice? Pirry Rise himself left clues in the map's margins, noting he'd synthesized 20 older sources, including maps from the time of Alexander the Great. Some scholars believe he accessed lost Portuguese or Arab charts from secret maritime archives. Others propose even wilder theories, that the map preserves ancient knowledge from seafaring civilizations like the Minoans or Phoenicians, whose voyages might have reached far southern latitudes. The most compelling detail: the coastline matches modern sonar scans of Antarctica's subglacial topography, features invisible until 20th century technology peeled back the ice. Yet the map is also riddled with enigmas. Rivers flow where none exist today, and the continent connects to South America in a way modern geology disproves. Skeptics argue this Antarctica might actually be Patagonia distorted by sketchy sources. But why would Pirry Rise, a seasoned navigator, place such a landmass directly south of Africa, precisely where Antarctica lies? The Admiral's own notes deepen the puzzle, mentioning a hot climate in the southern region, which some interpret as evidence he copied maps from a pre-Ice Age era. What's undeniable is the map's revolutionary context. Created just 21 years after Columbus's first voyage, it already depicts Brazil's eastern bulge with startling accuracy, likely thanks to Ottoman spies intercepting Portuguese charts. The inclusion of parrots and monkeys along the coasts isn't decoration. It's practical intelligence for traders seeking exotic goods. Even the winds are mapped as twisting lines, a navigational aid centuries ahead of its time. The Pirry Rise Map forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How much ancient knowledge was lost to wars, fires, or deliberate suppression? Could earlier civilizations have achieved feats we've arrogantly assumed were impossible? Whatever the truth, this fragile parchment reminds us that history isn't a straight line, it's a palimpsest, with layers waiting to be uncovered. Every stain and tear hides a story, and sometimes the most radical idea isn't that maps can be wrong, but that they might be right in ways we're only beginning to understand. In a Yale University vault rests a document that could unravel everything we thought we knew about who reached America first. The Vineland Map, supposedly drawn around 1440, shows something no European map of that era should: a jagged landmass west of Greenland labeled Vineland, matching descriptions of Norse settlements in modern-day Newfoundland. If genuine, this fragile piece of parchment would be the oldest known map depicting part of the Americas, predating Columbus by half a century, but that's a very big if. What makes this map so electrifying and so contentious is the story it whispers about Viking explorers. According to Icelandic sagas, Leif Erikson established a short-lived settlement called Vineland around the year 1000. For centuries, historians dismissed these tales as legend, until 1960, when archaeologists uncovered Norse ruins at Elance Oaks Meadows in Canada. The Vineland Map surfaced shortly after, as if waiting for the perfect moment to rewrite history. Its faded ink seems to confirm what the sagas claimed, that medieval Scandinavians not only reached North America, but mapped it. Yet from the moment it was unveiled to the public in 1965, the map has been shrouded in doubt. Chemists found traces of anatase, a titanium dioxide compound, in its ink, a substance common in 20th century pigments but unheard of in medieval manuscripts. The parchment itself is genuine, likely cut from a 15th century book, leading some to speculate a modern forger used old materials. Even the handwriting raises eyebrows. The Latin script includes phrases like "islands of the blessed" that feel more like romantic embellishment than practical cartography. But here's where the plot thickens. Recent advances in spectral imaging reveal the map's ink contains medieval ingredients after all, just degraded over time. The Greenland coastline is suspiciously accurate for a 15th century document, unless Norse sailors had better geographical knowledge than we thought. And then there's the wormholes. Tiny holes in the parchment align perfectly with a known medieval manuscript, suggesting the map was indeed bound in a genuine book centuries ago. The Vineland Map's greatest lesson might not be about who reached America first, but how fiercely we cling to historical narratives. For those who want it to be real, it's proof of Norse brilliance. For skeptics, it's a cautionary tale about how easily we're seduced by artifacts that confirm what we wish were true. Either way, this fragile sheet embodies cartography's dual nature, a discipline where every stroke can be a revelation or a riddle, and where the line between myth and map is often as blurred as old ink on vellum. When diplomats gathered in Paris in 1783 to end the American Revolution, they didn't just negotiate with words, they huddled over a map. John Mitchell's colossal 6-foot-wide masterpiece, drawn in 1755, became the unlikely arbiter of a new nation's fate. At first glance, it seemed authoritative. Lush forests shaded in green, rivers snaking westward with apparent precision, even notes on soil quality for prospective farmers. But hidden in its elegant calligraphy lay a dangerous flaw. The Appalachian Mountains were drawn nearly 100 miles east of their true location, a mistake that would ignite decades of bloody conflict. What made the Mitchell map so influential wasn't its accuracy, but its timing. As British and American delegates debated borders, they relied on its lines to divide territories, unaware that its errors placed indigenous lands like the Cherokee Nation within the newly minted United States rather than British-controlled Canada. The consequences were catastrophic. Settlers poured into regions marked as open on Mitchell's map, only to clash with native communities who'd lived there for generations. Treaties based on these faulty boundaries collapsed, and skirmishes flared into full-scale wars like the Northwest Indian War, where alliances of Shawnee, Miami, and other nations fought to protect homelands the map had inadvertently given away. Mitchell himself had never crossed the Appalachians. A Virginia physician turned amateur cartographer, he compiled his work from second-hand accounts, some decades old, and the biased reports of land speculators eager to downplay indigenous presence. His map reflected not reality, but colonial ambition. French territories were minimized, Spanish claims ignored, and Native American villages often omitted entirely. Yet this very partiality made it irresistible to European powers. It showed the continent as they wanted to see it, ripe for the taking. The cruel irony. Mitchell's most glaring mistakes may have been deliberate. By shifting the Appalachians eastward, he made the Ohio River Valley, a hotly contested region, appear firmly within Virginia's colonial charter. This sly distortion gave American negotiators in Paris leverage to demand more land, while British officials, equally reliant on the map, couldn't refute it. Cartographic warfare, it seemed, could be waged with ink as effectively as with muskets. Today, the Mitchell map hangs in London's British Library, its faded colors belying the violence it helped unleash. It stands as a stark reminder that maps don't just describe borders, they create them. Every squiggled line carries the weight of lives disrupted, cultures erased, and landscapes rewritten. In the end, Mitchell didn't just draw a map, he drew the blueprint for a continent's fractured future. In a quiet monastery on the Venetian island of Morrow, a monk named Fra Morrow was quietly dismantling the medieval worldview, one brushstroke at a time. His masterpiece, completed in 1450, wasn't just a map, it was a battleground where ancient beliefs and startling new truths clashed in silent rebellion. Unlike traditional medieval maps that placed Jerusalem at the center with paradise to the east, Fra Morrow's circular creation dared to suggest the earth might be more complex than scripture alone could explain. What makes this map extraordinary is its delicate balance between faith and fact. Biblical scenes still adorn its edges: Adam and Eve expelled from Eden, the Tower of Babel piercing the heavens, but the heart of the map pulses with fresh intelligence. Fra Morrow filled every inch with annotations from merchants, diplomats, and explorers, including Marco Polo's descriptions of Java's spices and the Mongol Empire's vastness. Most revolutionary of all, a note near southern Africa suggesting ships could sail around the continent to reach the Indian Ocean, challenging the ancient belief that the tropics were an impassable inferno. The monk's sources reveal a world buzzing with secret knowledge. Arab navigational charts smuggled out of Alexandria informed his depiction of the Indian Ocean's monsoon patterns. Ethiopian envoys visiting Venice described the Nile's true origins, contradicting classical myths. Even shipwrecked sailors contributed, their tales of distant shores transcribed by Fra Morrow's steady hand. This wasn't the work of a solitary scholar. It was a collaborative act of intellectual courage, stitching together a planet from fragments of whispered truth. Yet the map's true genius lies in its contradictions. Fra Morrow drew Africa as circumnavigable, but left a blank space where the Americas would later appear, unaware of the seismic discoveries just decades away. He dismissed the existence of antipodes people living on the opposite side of the globe as against reason, even as his own research hinted at a far larger world. These tensions make the map a poignant snapshot of a moment when humanity stood on the brink of knowing. The Fra Morrow map's survival is itself a miracle. Commissioned by King Alfonso V of Portugal, it was nearly lost when his palace burned in 1755. A single copy, made for Venice's Signoria, endured. Today, it hangs in the Biblioteca, its faded pigments still whispering secrets about the world it captured, and the even stranger one it couldn't yet imagine. Buried in a 17th century military manual lies a forgotten treasure, the Mao Kun Map, a sprawling scroll that charts the farthest reaches of 15th century Chinese exploration. Unlike European maps of the same era, which often framed the world through conquest or commerce, this document reads like a practical travelogue. Its delicate brushstrokes trace routes from the bustling ports of Fujian to the distant shores of Kenya, naming over 30 lands with meticulous care: Malacca's spice markets, Hormuz's pearl divers, even the giraffes of Mogadishu, gifts brought back to the Ming court. What's staggering isn't just the distances covered, but the precision. Currents, monsoon patterns, and star readings are noted with scientific rigor, suggesting Chinese navigators didn't just venture into the unknown, they mastered it. The map's origins are as dramatic as the voyages it records. Part of Admiral Zheng He's legendary treasure fleet expeditions between 1405 and 1433, it was likely compiled from hundreds of sailors' logs. These weren't modest journeys. His largest ships dwarfed Columbus's Santa Maria 5 times over, carrying not just soldiers but astronomers, diplomats, and pharmacists. The Mao Kun Map reflects this ambition. Along Africa's eastern coast, annotations describe trading copper for sapphires with Swahili merchants, while near Calicut, warnings note treacherous coral reefs, visible only at low tide. This wasn't guesswork, it was hard-won knowledge gathered through 7 epic voyages that stretched decades. Yet the map's true power lies in the questions it forces us to ask. Why did China, with its unmatched naval technology and detailed geographical knowledge, suddenly abandon global exploration in the 1430s? The answer whispers through the map's margins. Court scholars, wary of the fleet's staggering costs, labeled the voyages wasteful. Later emperors, turning inward, ordered records burned and ships left to rot. The Mao Kun Map survived only because it was repurposed as a military manual, its world-spanning vision reduced to a tactical reference. Today, the map taunts historians with its implications. Had China sustained its naval ambition, might the first circumnavigation have been achieved under a Ming dynasty flag? Would the Indian Ocean have remained a multicultural trading network rather than becoming a battleground for European empires? The Mao Kun Map doesn't just chart coasts, it charts roads not taken, a reminder that history pivots on choices as much as discoveries. Most maps force us to choose between accuracy and coherence, until Buckminster Fuller flipped the table in 1943 with his Dymaxion map. Imagine the Earth as a delicate origami sculpture, carefully unfolded into a net of 20 triangular faces. This wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a mathematical revelation. By projecting the planet onto an icosahedron, a 20-sided shape, Fuller achieved what no flat map could. Continents rendered with near-perfect proportionality, their true sizes and relationships preserved. Africa no longer shrank beneath Greenland's inflated bulk. Australia stretched to its rightful scale, and Antarctica emerged not as a distorted fringe, but as a cohesive landmass encircling the map's edges like a stabilizing frame. What makes Fuller's design revolutionary isn't just its precision, but its philosophy. Traditional maps split the world along meridians, inevitably slicing continents and reinforcing a sense of separation. The Dymaxion map, though, presents Earth as one island, its continents linked in an unbroken chain. Flip any triangle's orientation, and suddenly Europe nestles against North America, or Asia bridges to Africa in ways that highlight geological and cultural connections rather than arbitrary borders. Fuller called it the world game, a tool to help humanity visualize shared resources and interdependence at the dawn of the nuclear age. The map's radical potential becomes clear when you trace shipping routes or migration patterns across its surface. Trade winds curve naturally between triangles, ancient human dispersal paths align along shared edges, and even modern flight routes appear startlingly direct. It's as if Fuller hacked the planet's operating system, revealing hidden shortcuts and relationships obscured by conventional projections. Yet the Dymaxion map's most subversive quality is its refusal to privilege any viewpoint. Without a fixed top or bottom, it can be reassembled in dozens of ways, each configuration subtly challenging nationalistic narratives. During the Cold War, Fuller suggested rotating it to center the Arctic, emphasizing how close American and Soviet territories actually were across the pole. Today, environmentalists use it to trace climate currents that ignore political boundaries, while educators exploit its flexibility to teach geography from multiple cultural perspectives. Fuller's creation was decades ahead of its time, both technologically and ideologically. In an era before computer modeling, hand-drawing its complex net required painstaking calculation. Early critics dismissed it as a utopian gimmick, too abstract for practical navigation. But the joke's on them. Modern GPS systems use similar polyhedral math to minimize distortion in digital mapping. The Dymaxion map endures not just as a cartographic curiosity, but as a provocation. Every fold whispers the same question: what if borders were just creases we could smooth away? What if the distortions we accept as normal aren't inevitable, but choices waiting to be unfolded and reimagined? In Fuller's own words, it wasn't about depicting the world as it is, but as it might be. Unfolding like an ancient GPS scroll, the Putinger Map stretches 22 feet across fragile parchment, a 4th century Roman road trip planner that makes modern travel apps look amateurish. Forget accurate coastlines or proportional distances. This masterpiece from the late Empire cares about one thing: getting you from Londinium to India with every watering hole, military post, and luxury bathhouse along the way. Picture it as the ultimate rest stop directory, where the curvature of the earth matters less than knowing there's a decent inn after 50 miles of dusty via a pier. What's mesmerizing isn't just the map's length, it's how it warps reality to serve utility. The Mediterranean Sea squashes into a thin blue ribbon, while Italy stretches like taffy to fit every minor road. Mountain ranges become wavy doodles and entire cities shrink to tiny house icons. But these distortions reveal Roman genius. By sacrificing geographical precision for logistical clarity, the mapmakers created something far more valuable: a visual Wikipedia of imperial infrastructure. Handy symbols mark naval ports, toll booths, even sulfur springs for tired legionaries seeking a soak. The Alps, just a green squiggle to traverse between Milan's leather markets and Augsburg's iron forges. The map's survival is its own epic. Originally copied from a 1st century survey commissioned by Augustus himself, the sole surviving version was rescued from a medieval library by a German scholar named Conrad Putinger in 1508, hence its name. Charred edges suggest it narrowly escaped destruction, perhaps during the 30 Years' War when entire archives burned. That we can still trace its inked paths today, from the tin mines of Cornwall to the pepper warehouses of southern India, is nothing short of miraculous. Look closer, and the Putinger Map whispers secrets about Roman priorities. Military stations outnumber temples 3 to 1. The density of roads radiating from Rome mirrors the empire's hunger for grain, marble, and slaves. Most poignant are the blank spaces: no sub-Saharan Africa, no Scandinavia, not because Romans didn't know they existed, but because those lands lacked taxable cities or navigable highways. This was less a map of the world than a map of Roman profit margins. Yet for all its pragmatism, the scroll harbors whimsy. A crocodile lounges near the Nile, a nod to travelers' tales. Persian Gulf sprouts palm trees like a tourist brochure. Even in bureaucracy, humanity peeks through. Some long-dead scribe doodled the lighthouse of Alexandria twice as large as necessary, perhaps starstruck by its fame. The Putinger Map doesn't just guide travelers. It invites us to walk beside them, hearing the creak of ox carts and smelling the ink as a clerk updates the next imperial milestone. Roads, after all, aren't just lines on parchment, they're the veins of an empire's beating heart. Imagine holding the entire world in your hands, not as a king or scholar, but as an ordinary person in 1507. That's the revolution Martin Waldseemuller unleashed with his globe Gores, 12 delicate printed segments designed to be snipped out and pasted onto a sphere. For the first time in history, global awareness wasn't locked in royal treasuries or monastery scriptoria. It could be rolled up, shipped, and assembled in a merchant's attic or a schoolmaster's study. These intricately engraved strips weren't just a technical marvel. They were a cultural time bomb, smuggling radical geographic ideas into mainstream thought. What made Waldseemuller's innovation so subversive was its medium. Printed on the same presses that churned out religious pamphlets, the globe Gores turned geography into a mass-produced commodity. Suddenly, the same discoveries debated in Lisbon's courts, like the existence of a mysterious southern land labeled America, could spark conversations in German taverns or Italian workshops. The Gores functioned as a kind of Renaissance DIY kit, inviting users to literally piece together their own understanding of the planet. Assembling the strips around a wooden sphere, they'd watch as Brazil's coast aligned with Africa's bulge, or as the Pacific Ocean's vastness unfurled between Asia and the New World. This wasn't passive learning, it was tactile, participatory, and deeply personal. The genius of the design lay in its flexibility. Unlike hand-painted globes costing a fortune, these paper segments could be reprinted, revised, and even corrected as new discoveries emerged. Waldseemüller himself famously backtracked in later editions, removing the name America after doubting his sources, but the cat was already out of the bag. The Gores had already circulated too widely, their democratic format ensuring the name stuck. Hidden in the Gores' elegant curves is a quieter rebellion. Traditional globes had always been luxury objects, their creation controlled by power brokers who dictated what knowledge was official. By decentralizing production, Waldseemuller undermined that control. A baker's son could now own a globe showing lands his king hadn't yet claimed. The very act of assembly became a silent protest against geographic gatekeeping. Yet the Gores' true legacy isn't just in their accessibility, it's in their lingering mysteries. Why did Waldseemuller depict Antarctica's coastline with eerie accuracy decades before its discovery? How did he know the Pacific stretched wider than most Europeans imagined? Some speculate he accessed secret Portuguese charts, others whisper of lost explorers' accounts. Whatever the truth, these paper fragments remind us that every map, no matter how mass-produced, carries traces of the unknown, and that sometimes the most radical ideas come not from palaces but from print shops. High on the limestone cliffs of China's Zujojong River Valley, a secret has weathered 2,000 years of monsoons and dynasties. Stretching across nearly 200 miles of rock face, the Zujojong Petroglyphs aren't just ancient art, they're a cryptic love letter to landscape, possibly the oldest surviving map in East Asia. Picture this, hundreds of rust-red figures dancing, drumming, and kneeling in procession, their ochre pigment mixed with animal blood to ensure permanence. But look closer and patterns emerge. Wavy lines mirror the river's bends below. Clusters of stick figure huts align with known Bronze Age village sites. Even the ceremonial scenes map onto seasonal floodplains where rituals likely occurred. This wasn't decoration, it was data, painted in a language we're only beginning to decipher. What makes these carvings revolutionary isn't just their age, but their layered purpose. Unlike later maps that prioritized navigation or ownership, the Zujojong glyphs seem to fuse spiritual and practical knowledge. A zigzag path might represent both an actual mountain trail and the symbolic journey of the soul. Circular motifs could mark fertile fishing holes or sacred portals to the underworld. For the Luoyu people who created them, geography and cosmology were inseparable. To map the land was to honor its spirits. Modern LiDAR scans reveal eerie correlations between the painted features and hidden archaeological sites, suggesting the artists encoded real-world coordinates within their symbolism. Yet the map's true genius lies in its mutability, depending on the viewer's knowledge, fisherman, shaman, or outsider. The same strokes could guide a canoe route, dictate ritual timing, or warn of dangerous currents. Some scholars argue the towering cliff face canvas itself was deliberate, forcing observers to physically crane their necks, enacting the reverence demanded by the landscape. This wasn't a map meant to be rolled up and carried. It was anchored to the earth it described, as permanent as the river's flow. The mystery deepens when you consider the tools available. Without compasses or surveying equipment, how did the artists achieve such accurate proportions? One theory points to moonlight. During certain lunar phases, shadows cast by the jagged cliffs trace lines eerily similar to the petroglyphs' river courses. Did ancient mapmakers use the night sky as their grid, etching where nature's own projections guided them? Today, the Zujojong Map challenges our very definition of cartography. In an era of satellite precision, it reminds us that maps were once living stories, where a dancing figure could be both celebration and signpost. These cliffs don't just depict a landscape, they are the landscape, whispering across millennia that every place is more than coordinates. It's memory, meaning, and the marks we leave to say, we were here, and this is how we understood the world. For King Henry II of France, the world wasn't just a place to rule, it was a stage for spectacle. The Decellia's map of 1550, a sprawling masterpiece of painted vellum, delivered exactly that. Stretching over 4 feet tall, this wasn't just a navigational tool, it was a royal status symbol, dripping with gold leaf and crammed with scenes so vivid they seemed to breathe. Indigenous Brazilians roast exotic birds over open fires. African kings hold court under striped canopies. Even the oceans teem with mermaids and sea monsters locked in eternal combat. At first glance, it's easy to dismiss these flourishes as pure fantasy, until you notice the chilling precision of coastal outlines, lifted straight from secret Portuguese charts. The map's genius lies in this duality. It's both a triumph of observation and a carnival of imagination. What makes the Decellia's map so revealing is how it mirrors the European mindset at history's turning point. Every creature, every village scene is a clue to what fascinated and terrified the Renaissance elite. Take the depiction of giants in Patagonia, their elongated legs stretching across the parchment. These weren't just flights of fancy, they echoed real accounts from Magellan's crew, who'd encountered the towering Tehuelche people and spun their height into myth. Similarly, the map's portrayal of Timbuktu as a golden metropolis wasn't invented. It came from North African traders' tales, exaggerated through generations of wishful thinking. Decellia's, working in the port city of Deep, had access to sailors' gossip, spies' reports, and royal archives, blending them into a single, seductive narrative. The map's treatment of indigenous cultures is particularly telling. Unlike later colonial maps that erased or homogenized native peoples, Decellia's lavished attention on their diversity. Inuit hunters harpoon seals through ice floes near Labrador, while half a world away, Moluccan islanders harvest cloves in terraced gardens. These vignettes weren't just decorative, they were strategic intelligence. France, lagging behind Spain and Portugal in global conquest, hungered for details about prosperous societies ripe for trade or takeover. The map's margins even include a French Toupet-Garonne phrasebook, revealing how deeply commercial motives drove its creation. Yet beneath the artistry lurks a quiet rebellion. Look closely at South America, and you'll spot a group of cannibals devouring limbs, except their features are distinctly European. Was this a sly critique of colonial brutality, or perhaps the mapmaker's private joke about who was truly savage? Such ambiguity was possible because maps like this existed in a gray area between science and propaganda. They had to please patrons without outright lying, a balancing act that required visual wit. The Decellia's map's afterlife is as dramatic as its creation. After the French Revolution, it vanished for decades, only to resurface in a London bookshop's bargain bin. Today, it sits in the British Library, its colors still vibrant after 5 centuries. More than just a pretty artifact, it challenges our modern divide between fact and fiction. In an age of GPS precision, we forget that all maps are stories, and the best ones, like Decellia's, remind us that every line drawn is a choice about what to include, what to exaggerate, and what to leave swirling in the realm of the unknown. Abraham Ortelius didn't just publish an atlas in 1570. He created the world's first Wikipedia of geography. Picture a 16th century Antwerp bookshop where merchants and scholars crowd around a leather-bound volume the size of a small table. As they flip through the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum's 70 hand-colored maps, they're witnessing something revolutionary. For the first time, humanity's collective knowledge of the planet has been curated, compared, and bound under one cover. Ortelius didn't merely copy existing maps, he fact-checked them. When Spanish and Portuguese charts disagreed on the shape of South America, he flagged the discrepancies in margin notes. If a coastline seemed suspiciously smooth, he cross-referenced it with sailors' logs. This wasn't just a collection, it was a conversation with Ortelius as the moderator. What set the Theatrum apart wasn't just its scope, though spanning from the Arctic to the Moluccas was impressive, but its philosophy. Ortelius introduced the radical notion that maps should evolve. Early editions included blank pages labeled Terra Incognita, not as decorations but as invitations. As explorers' reports trickled in, later printings filled these voids, turning the atlas into a living document. The Theatrum became a mirror of the age itself, reflecting how quickly the world was expanding in the European imagination. A map of the Americas updated between 1570 and 1579, for instance, suddenly showed California as a peninsula rather than an island, a correction based on smuggled Spanish charts. The atlas's secret weapon was its backroom network. Ortelius corresponded with scholars from Jerusalem to Mexico City, trading maps like currency. Jesuit missionaries sent him sketches of Asian coastlines. Ottoman diplomats leaked black market portolan charts. Even pirates contributed. One edition's startlingly accurate Caribbean section was rumored to come from a captured Portuguese navigator's stolen notes. This underground exchange gave the Theatrum an edge no single nation could match, blending secrets from rival empires into a mosaic no king or pope had ever seen in full. Yet Ortelius's true innovation was visual. By standardizing sizes and orientations, he allowed readers to flip from Flanders to Peru without mental recalibration. His elegant typography and uniform color keys, blue for water, ochre for mountains, created a language of clarity that modern atlases still follow. Even the decorative elements served a purpose. Sea monsters marked dangerous currents, while city illustrations denoted economic importance. Every flourish was data in disguise. The Theatrum's legacy pulses through every GPS app and classroom globe today. It proved that knowledge grows stronger when shared, that borders blur when seen from enough vantage points. Ortelius never sailed farther than England, but his atlas became a ship carrying millions of minds across uncharted waters. In the end, his greatest discovery wasn't a new land. It was the power of putting the whole world on the same page. The British didn't just conquer India with muskets and treaties, they did it with trigonometry. For over a century, teams of surveyors fanned out across the subcontinent, their theodolites and measuring chains turning jungles, mountains, and villages into a grid of precise coordinates. The Great Trigonometrical Survey, launched in 1802, was a staggering feat of both science and subjugation. Imagine teams of pandits, Indian surveyors disguised as holy men walking thousands of miles with hidden compasses and prayer wheels, secretly counting their steps to map forbidden territories. Others braved malaria and bandits to plant flags on Himalayan peaks, their calculations so exact they even detected the Earth's curvature by measuring how mountaintop angles slightly diverged from predictions. But beneath this veneer of scientific progress lurked a darker purpose. Every river charted, every forest delineated, made it easier for the crown to tax, log, and control. The survey's director, George Everest, whose name now graces the world's tallest mountain, openly admitted his work served the interests of the state. Villages became dots on a ledger, their farmland assessed for maximum revenue. Sacred groves vanished from maps, replaced by symbols marking timber reserves. Even the survey's naming conventions erased local knowledge. Substituting Sanskrit and Persian placed names with anglicized versions that still linger today. Yet the map's legacy is a paradox. The same instruments of exploitation also produced astonishing accuracy. When survey teams finally pinned down India's longitude in 1804, their margin of error was less than 50 feet over 1,000 miles, a precision unmatched anywhere at the time. The data collected didn't just serve tax collectors. It helped predict monsoons, trace earthquake faults, and even inspired the metric system's original meter length, calculated from these very surveys. The most haunting detail, many surveyors knew their work's dual nature. Colonel William Lambton, the project's founder, filled his journals with genuine fascination for India's geology, even as his measurements tightened Britain's grip. The maps themselves became palimpsests of power and knowledge, where a single sheet might show both the depth of a river's alluvial gold and the marching routes for troops to secure it. Today, these maps endure as both masterpieces and indictments. Modern Indian scientists still consult them for environmental baselines, even as historians trace how their lines fueled famine by prioritizing cash crops over subsistence farming. The survey of India maps remind us that no grid is neutral, that every measurement carries the fingerprints of those who wield it, and that the same tools used to understand a land can also be used to take it apart. Galileo's trembling hand made history in 1609, not with a grand gesture, but with a series of delicate ink strokes on paper. Peering through his homemade telescope in the gardens of Padua, he saw what no human had truly grasped before. The moon wasn't a perfect celestial orb, but a world. His sketches, hurriedly drawn by candlelight, revealed mountains casting jagged shadows, plains pocked with craters, and valleys that mirrored Earth's own terrain. These weren't just drawings, they were the first maps of another world, and they shattered an ancient belief held since Aristotle, that the heavens were unblemished and unchanging. What made Galileo's lunar maps revolutionary wasn't their precision. His crude telescope distorted edges, and his renderings barely resembled modern photographs, but their implication. By daring to depict the moon as a place with topography and texture, he pulled it from the realm of myth into the domain of geography. Suddenly, the moon wasn't just a luminous disk in poetry. It was land to be measured, studied, perhaps even visited. His Sidereus Nuncius, or Starry Messenger, published in 1610, included these maps alongside observations of Jupiter's moons, creating a cosmic domino effect. If the moon had mountains, why not other worlds? If Jupiter had satellites, why not other suns? The backlash was swift. Church scholars condemned his work as heresy, insisting the moon's imperfections defied divine perfection. Rival astronomers dismissed his claims, attributing the shadows to optical illusions or even lunar vapors. But Galileo's maps carried a quiet power. They were reproducible. Anyone with a decent telescope could verify the moon's roughness, turning skepticism into awe. Soon, an underground network of astronomers across Europe began refining his sketches, adding their own notations. A Benedictine monk in Bavaria charted the moon's libration, its subtle wobble revealing glimpses of the far side. A Dutch lensmaker mapped the moon's phases so precisely that sailors could use them to predict tides. Galileo's greatest innovation, though, was his method. He didn't just draw what he saw, he applied terrestrial cartography's rules to the cosmos. He named lunar features after Earth's mountains, the Apennines, the Alps, implicitly suggesting that the same forces shaped both worlds. This act of cosmic analogy became the foundation of planetary science. Centuries later, when NASA engineers needed to navigate the Apollo landings, they relied on maps descended directly from Galileo's intuition that the moon was a place, not a symbol. Hidden in those 400-year-old sketches is a lesson about perspective. Galileo's telescope magnified the moon only 20 times less than a modern toy telescope. Yet his willingness to see differently, to map the unfamiliar in terms of the known, opened a door we're still walking through. Every rover on Mars, every probe orbiting Saturn carries his legacy, the audacity to chart the unknown, one imperfect line at a time. The Cold War wasn't just fought in spy exchanges and missile silos. It was waged on paper with ink and latitude lines as weapons. In 1946, as tensions between the United States and Soviet Union froze into permanence, the CIA quietly commissioned a map that would redefine global strategy. Unlike traditional maps that centered on the equator, this one placed the Arctic at its heart, splaying continents outward like petals of a frozen flower. At first glance, it looked like a cartographic accident until you noticed the thick red arcs tracing the shortest routes between Moscow and New York, bomber paths over the pole, where early warning systems were blind and reaction times collapsed. This wasn't geography, it was a blueprint for doomsday. What made the CIA's polar projection so unsettling was its brutal honesty. By flattening the globe along flight corridors rather than trade routes, it revealed a chilling truth. The vast oceans that had shielded America for centuries were now irrelevant. The real front line ran through ice caps and tundra, where the distance between superpowers narrowed to a terrifying few hours by jet. Soviet cities clustered like bullseyes around the map's edges, their proximity to Alaska and Canada suddenly visceral. Even the map's color scheme felt tactical. Landmasses washed in pale blues and grays evoked the nuclear winter its creators feared. The genius and horror of this projection lay in its psychological impact. Pentagon planners pinned it to war room walls, while school children saw it in civil defense drills, absorbing the implicit lesson that danger came from above, not across oceans. Airlines adopted modified versions for polar routes, normalizing the idea that the Arctic wasn't just wasteland, but a highway. Over time, the CIA's perspective seeped into popular culture, from James Bond films to doomsday novels, reinforcing the notion that global power hinged on controlling the top of the world. Yet the map's legacy extends beyond warfare. Environmental scientists later repurposed its Arctic-centric view to track melting ice caps, proving how a tool designed for destruction could pivot to preservation. Modern climate models still use its geometry to visualize feedback loops, where warming poles destabilize the entire planet. The irony is palpable. A Cold War artifact now helping diagnose a crisis its makers never imagined. Hidden in the CIA's crisp contours is a timeless lesson about perspective. Every map is an argument about what matters: trade wins or missile wins, commerce or conflict. Switch the center and you don't just change the view, you change the game. The planet beneath our feet isn't just shifting, it's remembering. The latest revolution in cartography isn't about plotting streets or borders, but resurrecting lost worlds. Scientists now stitch together deep time maps, digital mosaics that peel back epochs to reveal supercontinents like Pangaea, where Brazil once snuggled against West Africa like puzzle pieces, or track the march of ice sheets during the last glacial maximum, when sea levels plunged so low you could walk from Siberia to Alaska. These aren't static snapshots, they're time-lapse visions of Earth's restless skin, stretching and splitting over hundreds of millions of years. What makes these reconstructions astonishing isn't just their scale, but their precision. By cross-referencing magnetic minerals frozen in ancient rocks, nature's own GPS with fossilized pollen grains and deep-sea sediment cores, geologists can pinpoint where monsoon rains drenched the Sahara 50 million years ago, or how the Amazon's course has writhed like a snake across the ages. Climate models supercharged by supercomputers breathe life into these maps, simulating atmospheric currents over vanished mountain ranges or ocean currents swirling around long submerged islands. The effect is humbling. Human history collapses into a blink against the slow ballet of continents. Yet these maps aren't just academic exercises, they're survival tools. When deep-time cartographers traced the fingerprints of prehistoric megadroughts in the American Southwest, they uncovered patterns alarmingly similar to modern climate shifts. Ice Age maps showing sudden methane releases from thawing Arctic lakes now inform predictions about today's permafrost. Even the breakup of Pangaea offers clues, revealing how continental drift can trigger volcanic outbursts that last for millennia. The past, it seems, is the only reliable blueprint for our climate future. The most profound impact might be philosophical. Folding and unfolding these maps forces a Copernican-scale perspective shift, not of Earth's place in space, but of humanity's place in time. Cities built on river deltas, temporary settlements on landscapes that were oceans yesterday and may be mountains tomorrow, national borders, fleeting scratches on a crust that's recycled itself 3 times over since the dinosaurs. Some deep time maps even project forward, showing Australia merging with Asia in 60 million years or the Atlantic Ocean closing like a zipper as new supercontinents form. Hidden in these pixelated prehistories is a radical idea. Geography isn't just about where we are, but when we are. Every oil field was once a sunlit swamp, every desert a seabed. The ground we fight over, the coasts we cherish, they're not fixed but frames in an endless film. Deep time maps don't just chart rocks, they dissolve the illusion of permanence, leaving us adrift on a planet that's always been, and always will be, in motion. From the moment ancient Babylonians pressed their world into damp clay to the glowing satellite images on our smartphones today, maps have never been simple tools. They've been arguments, dreams, and sometimes even acts of rebellion. Each of these 30 maps carries the fingerprints of its creators: the monk who risked heresy by questioning scripture, the spy who smuggled coastlines in a diplomatic pouch, the housewife who redrew her neighborhood to protest highway construction. What unites them isn't just ink or pixels, but the audacity to say, "This is how things are, or how they could be." Consider how much courage it took to leave blank spaces where dragons once lurked, or to center a map on the Arctic instead of Europe during the Cold War. These weren't just technical choices, they were philosophical ones. When Fra Morrow placed south at the top of his medieval masterpiece, or when Buckminster Fuller unfolded the Earth into 20 interlocking triangles, they weren't just depicting geography, they were offering new ways to imagine our place within it. Even today's AI-generated maps, constantly updating with traffic patterns and climate data, inherit this dual legacy. They guide our drives while silently shaping how we perceive distance, danger, and community. The most surprising revelation isn't how far cartography has come, but how consistently it mirrors our priorities. The Kangnido Map's meticulous trade routes remind us that commerce has always driven exploration, while the Peter's projections' intentional distortions force us to confront whose lands we've historically shrunk literally and figuratively. Modern apps like Google Earth promise omniscience, yet their algorithms still reflect the biases of their programmers, highlighting tourist sites over refugee camps or filtering disputed borders based on your IP address. As we stand on the brink of holographic atlases and Mars colonization charts, let's not forget the human hand behind every line. The next time you glance at a GPS, remember, you're not just seeing roads, but layers of choices about what to include, what to name, and what to erase. That's the real magic of maps. They don't just show us where we are. They show us who we've been and who we might become. So tell us, which of these maps reshaped your worldview? Drop your thoughts below and keep exploring, because the next great map might be the one you draw.